This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, rel-mar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send an email, X-Zone at xzoneradiotv.com on all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. And if you'd like to find out the programming we have on the X-Zone Broadcast Network for you 24/7, 365, visit www.xzbn.net. Don't forget, this coming weekend in Fellsmere, Florida, the 4th Annual Treasure Coast Para-Unity Conference. Our show host of the Paranormal Stakeout, Larry Lawson, is one of the organizers, and it's going to be a great event. I was there last year. I am going to be there this year. And if you'd like more information on that, and if you want to buy tickets, come down and see us. The website is www.paraunityconference.com. My guest this hour is Dr. John Opsopaus. He has practiced magic, divination, and Neopaganism since the 1960s. He has some 40 publications in various magical and Neopagan magazines and anthologies. He designed the Pythagorean Tarot and wrote the comprehensive guide to how do you say that?
Pythagorean.
Thank you very much for that. Tarot, which was published by our good friends at Llewellyn in 2001. He has recently released Oracles of Apollo, published by Llewellyn in 2017. Teaches divination based on ancient Greek text that he has translated. Opsopaus frequently presents workshops on Hellenic magic and Neopaganism, divination, and related topics. In the early 1990s, he founded the Omphalos, there you go, a networking organization for Neopagans in the Greek and Roman traditions, and one of the first internet resources for them. He is the past coordinator of the Scholars Guild for the Church of All Worlds, past Arkhon of the Hellenic Kin of ADF, a Druid Fellowship, and a member of the Grey Council. His writings can be found at Opsopaus.com and Omphalos.org/BA. And the spelling of Opsopaus is OPSOPAUS.com. Dr. John, welcome to the X-Zone.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be able to talk to you.
Well, we're very happy, too. Why all the hard names?
Well, some ancient Greek names are kind of complicated. They have lots of syllables and sometimes odd combinations of letters. But it's, many people who follow the ancient pagan traditions, although it's not necessary to use the ancient languages, we kind of like it. We feel like we're more in contact with our ancestors, and so we tend to use Greek and Latin words sometimes to help strengthen that connection.
What was it that brought you on your crusade or your journey into paganism?
Well, it's hard to say. One of the sort of commonplaces in the modern pagan movement is most people feel like they're coming home. So there's really a sense that when people discover that there's pagans in the world today and that it's a active and vibrant religion, they kind of feel like, well, I've never felt home in any of the other religions, or perhaps with no religion, and now I find that this is just feels right. It's a comfortable fit. In my own case, I was always very interested in ancient classical civilizations, so Egyptian, Greek, and Roman in the Western tradition. And I always liked the art and the literature and the philosophy. And so it was just very natural to kind of adopt also the religion of those ancient people.
All right, Dr. John here. You and I have to take our...
just John.
All right, John. You and I have to take our first break for this segment of the show. Please stand by, Exonation. We're talking about paganism, magic, divination, and much more here on this edition of the X-Zone. Our guest is the one and only Dr. John Opsopaus, and his website is opsopaus.com, and we'll both be back on the other side of this commercial break as we continue investigating the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here in the X-Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell. Two things, don't forget the fourth annual Treasure Coast Para Unity Conference, www.paraunityconference.com, this coming weekend, and the all-new XZBN Channel 365, News Talk, Music, and Information. That's at www.xzbnchannel365.com.
Rob, or anyone there,
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. All right, Exonation. Just when you think you've got it licked, they drag you right back in. I'm going to be hosting the all-new Good Morning from Hamilton show Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. on the all-new broadcast channel, XZBN Channel 365, which is our news talk, music, and information channel. Once again, www.xzbnchannel365.com. That launches on November the 15th. All right, my guest is Dr. John Apollonius Opsopaus. That's his name. And let me ask you, John, why do you think, is it my imagination, or more and more people turning to paganism, and a lot more people are talking about it these days than I can remember?
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, there's many reasons for this. Pagan religions tend to be very nature-focused, and so I think the growing awareness or growing environmental awareness has inclined a lot of people towards the pagan religions. I mean, sometimes some of the other major religions are kind of anti-nature and anti-earth because they're focused on, heaven or immaterial reality, whereas the pagan religions are much more earth-based. And so in almost all of the pagan religions, all of them I expect, the earth is considered a goddess. And so veneration of the earth is a very important part of it. Another thing is that pagan religions have goddesses, and they generally had priestesses. And so many people that are interested in equality between the genders have been drawn to the pagan religions as well. They feel like having female divinities as well as male divinities, and also having a long tradition of female priesthood is very empowering for women. And often also for the gay community, too, which in many of the pagan religions, gay people were, and some of the gods were considered essentially gay.
Yeah.
So I think many of the social movements in the 20th century and now into the 21st century are in many ways more compatible with the pagan religions than with the more common religions that we're familiar with.
Well, it would seem to me that there is a great influence from the pagan religions into Christianity and other religious philosophies that are accepted around the world. For example, we all know for a fact that a number of the traditions at Christmas time are pagan.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. It's a very common thing when a new religion moves into an area or even a new political system, that they often co-opt existing traditions and holidays and things like that. Part of it because that's what people do, and people are, they have habits of celebrating at certain times of the year and in certain ways, and rather than trying to suppress that and replace it with an entirely new tradition, it's often expedient to essentially reinterpret and perhaps change in some ways the old traditions to make them compatible with the new religion. So certainly, as you said, many of our seasonal celebrations have their roots in pagan history. Also, much of the philosophy, especially in what I'm interested in, which is ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, was incorporated into Christianity. It also, interestingly enough, especially some of the Greek traditions were incorporated into Islam as well. And so you find them in the more mystical branches of Islam, such as Sufism. So you find these traditions, and in Judaism too, for that matter, which of course is old as these pagan religions, but nevertheless absorbed some of these Pythagorean ideas and Neoplatonic ideas from the Greek world. And so, especially in their more mystical branches of all of the great Western religions, you find a lot of pagan philosophy, pagan practices, and of course, pagan holidays and things like that as well. So I think this is important because although I practice a Hellenic Neopaganism, many of the practices that I try and teach in my books are reasonably compatible with, at least for open-minded people, in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam as well. And I think it helps us to see sort of the common core of spiritual practices and even magical practices that are at the heart of all of these religions.
Well, let's talk about one of the books you wrote, The Oracles of Apollo. Why did you write that book?
Well, when I was getting involved in Neopaganism in the early days, I was interested in methods of divination, and we can talk a little more about divination in general, but it's really a way of contacting the gods, of being in communion with the gods. And in the Neopagan community, there are people that used, for example, tarot, and I use tarot. As you mentioned, I designed my own Pythagorean tarot some years ago. People in the more Germanic Neopagan traditions would use runes and do rune casting, and I've done that. We know there are Eastern traditions, such as the I Ching. And But since I was practicing a Greek form of Neopaganism, I thought, well, I would really like to use a Greek form of divination as well. And so I started researching it, and I found that we have several well-documented ancient Greek forms of divination. And but some of them had not. In fact, at that time, I don't believe any of them had been translated into English. They were still in the original Greek, ancient Greek. And so for my own purpose, originally, I translated these into English and started using them. And in the early 1990s, I put some of these translations up on the internet, and so other people could use them as well. And over the years, people have been using them and have found them to be very valuable. So over the years, archaeologists and classical scholars have improved the texts of these oracles and have discovered new inscriptions and so forth. And so I thought it was time to finally put them together into a comprehensive book, which provides the oracles as a practical means of divination and gives aids to help you interpret the oracles and, puts them all in the context of the ancient practice of divination. So it's really, it's primarily targeted at people that are interested in the Greek and Roman traditions, but certainly they can be used by anybody. They're just a system of divination, and with minor accommodation, you could use them no matter what your religion is, or even if you're an agnostic.
John, what is the importance of divination as a spiritual practice?
Well, the main importance really comes from the name. If you think of divination, it has divinity as part of the name. And in the ancient world, divination was seen as a way of coming into direct contact and communion with the gods. So in the sort of simplest and most concrete way, that would be asking a god a question and finding out an answer, getting an answer from that god. What should I do in this situation? As you may know, in the ancient world, there were oracles all around. The most famous one was the Oracle of Apollo at Delphi.
Yes.
And people would travel, long distances and over quite rough terrain to get to the Oracle at Delphi to ask a question. And the priestess there, the Pythia, she's called, would go into a trance and answer that question. And people would go to other oracles around the Mediterranean as well for the same purpose. So it's a way of, in the simplest sense, getting an answer to a question from a god. But it was also viewed more generally as a way of attuning our own psyches with the sort of the divine mind. So by putting us in contact with the gods, it was a way of aligning the individual psyche or soul with some divinity or group of divinities, and essentially opening up a two-way communication channel with them. So in that sense, it was a way of becoming a more spiritual person.
Would prayer fall under the definition of divination?
It's closely related to it, and typically any sort of ancient divination would include prayer.
Okay.
So there would be some sort of petition to the god to, if you like, open the channel of communication. And, at least as the Neoplatonists understood prayer, what the purpose of prayer was to essentially tune your psyche to be on the same wavelength as a particular god. And so the radio analogy is actually pretty accurate. It's the gods are everywhere all the time, but just like radio waves, but we can tune the radio to a particular frequency, and then we can hear that signal. And so prayer is the process essentially of doing that tuning.
But if someone practices divination in order to get a response from a god or a deity, how likely are they to get one?
Well, so these systems, there's different systems, and some of them are more reliable than others in various ways. So the Pythia went into a trance And they would actually, the priests and priestesses around her would do a preliminary divination to find out if it was a good idea for her to go into that trance, which was quite a taxing experience. And so in that sense, you didn't always get an answer. And the systems that I describe in the oracles of Apollo, they're more mechanical systems. It was called technical divination because it involved some practices, rolling dice or casting knuckle bones or something like that. And in that case, you can always do it, and you'll get an answer. But typically, there's signs, for example, that the god might not want to give you an answer. So to give a very simple example, if you're rolling dice on a table, for example, or in a tray, and they roll off the table, that would be interpreted as a sign that it's not auspicious to do a divination at that time, that the god, for whatever reason, doesn't want to give you an answer. And the answers are typically quite ambiguous. That was one of the common observations about oracles in the ancient world, is they're almost always ambiguous. And they explained that in many different ways. They said, the gods want us to exercise our wits, or they want to hide the meaning from the ignorant or the uninitiated, were two of the explanations that might be given. So typically what this means is that when you do a divination, you get an answer, but it's not necessarily clearly applicable to your question. And so one of the most important processes in divination, and this is where prayer comes in again, because you would pray to the god to help you to understand the oracle correctly. There are lots of myths where somebody went to Delphi and got an oracle, and they misinterpreted it, and that led to disaster.
Well, let's talk more about this when we come back for our news break. Exonation, our guest this hour is Dr. John Opsopaus, and his website is opsopaus.com. That's opsopaus.com, and we'll both be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the X Zone Broadcast Network and iHeartRadio.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
All right, Exonation, our guest this hour is Dr. John Opsopaus. His website is opsopaus.com. And before we went to the break, we were talking about divination and contacting the gods, asking a question. And one of the things you said that didn't make sense to me was when you were saying that, somebody, for example, would use dice that would go off the tray, and to them that would mean that the god didn't want to give an answer at the time. Well, how do we know it wasn't the person just throwing the dice too hard?
Well, you don't. And so, in fact, the normal practice would be you would try again.
Okay.
And if the next time it seemed to work okay, then you would say, okay, it was just a meaningless mistake. If it happened a second time, then you would become a little suspicious. And the general rule in the ancient world was if you tried 3 times and it didn't work, then you gave up at least for 24 hours. So that was considered a clear signal that you weren't going to get an answer. And, they also said actually quite explicitly, when the omens, if you like, were against doing a divination, if you went ahead and did one anyway, you would be almost guaranteed to get a bad answer. So they tried to be quite sensitive to this, and I think this shows that although it's a mechanical procedure, you have to be very open to the nuances of it. So anything that might indicate it was not auspicious, that it was not the right thing to do, would be considered. It wouldn't necessarily end the story, but it would at least be considered. And conversely, there could be very good omens too that would suggest that the god was there and was willing and eager to give you an answer to this question.
How many different gods are there, and how do you know if your message is getting to the right god?
Well, so there's innumerable gods, really. I mean, in almost any polytheistic pantheon, because aside from what are sometimes called the great gods, and that would be the 12 Olympians in the case of the ancient Greeks and Romans, there's just hundreds of others, because every deity, every forest, every grove, every lake, every stream had its deities, every island, and so all of these are potential ones to communicate with. So how do you know who you're talking to?
Yeah.
Well, so this is part of the Neoplatonic theory of divination, is that the gods have lineages that descend from them. And the great gods have larger lineages and the lesser gods have lesser ones. And these lineages include other gods, of course, but they also include things. So to take a classic example, the god Apollo is, in his lineage, is Helios, which is the sun god, and also the sun as a planet is also in that lineage. But then also various sorts of sun-like things, so sunflowers, for example. A cock, because it crows at the sunrise, would also be in the lineage of Apollo. And various, golden or yellow or golden gemstones, like citrine, would be in the lineage of Apollo. So the idea these are all symbols, and this is part of what attunes you to a particular god. And it's not just things, but it's also the names of the gods. So the gods have their name, like Apollon for Apollo, but then also various epithets. And so in a prayer, a person would call the god by name and use these various other names, these epithets, and it all kind of builds up, it accumulates essentially a symbolic charge to connect with a particular deity. And so this is why if you look at statues of Apollo, for example, he's holding various attributes, a lyre, for example, a musical instrument. So being aware of those various symbols and visualizing them in your mind, or having them actually there, either full-sized or perhaps in some sort of representation, are all ways of attuning your psyche to that particular god's energy. So again, each god is conceived of as having an energy that's a sort of different frequency. And what you have to do is, through these symbolic connections, establish or tune your psyche to that particular energy. And it's not, it's certainly not, a guaranteed sort of thing, but usually that will at least get you within the lineage of that god. And so in that sense, you're still talking to the right department, so to speak, in the polytheistic bureaucracy.
Now, you were mentioning that there were some woods that even had their own gods. Who would create the god, and what would the criteria to be classified as a god be?
Well, so this is most of these gods are, of course, the ancients could give you lineages for all of these gods. They could say who their parents were and who those parents were, and trace it all the way back to the first gods. But now I have to say that there are usually different versions of the same lineage, so it was by no means a absolutely certain thing. But the idea is that the gods of a particular mountain or forest or river were probably offspring of Mother Earth, Gaia, or Ge in ancient Greek. or perhaps of one of her sons or daughters. And so in that sense, they weren't invented. They were born out of the earth. And people would discover them essentially by feeling or sensing the presence of divinity within a particular place. And I mean, many of your listeners will probably have had this experience of when they're hiking or something like that. They'll go into a place and it'll feel magically charged to them. And, so the ancients would understand that to be, well, there's a divinity here of some sort. It may be a lesser one, it may be a greater one. And then they would start making offerings to it. They'd maybe make a little altar. They would pray to it. And, maybe that deity would tell them who they are. They would give them a name, for example. Or they might just be addressed as the god of this place, the god of this forest or this river.
How does paganism and what we've been talking about, how does this benefit the people of the 21st century?
Well, I think it benefits them in several different ways. As I mentioned before, paganism is in many ways more compatible with what I would think of as more modern attitudes towards gender and the earth and the environment than many of the better-known religions. And so that's one reason that people have been drawn to paganism. It's an earth-centered religion. It's a sex-positive religion. It's a religion that honors men equally or even above, or excuse me, that honors women equally or even above men, and the feminine equally or above the masculine. So those are some of the things that I think makes it attractive to 21st century people. But another one that we've only kind of alluded to here is it's a very experiential religion. Pagans expect to have religious experiences. They expect to talk to gods, to have epiphanies of gods. And whereas many of the more traditional organized religions, it's much more of a cerebral and disembodied kind of thing. You go to the church, you hear a sermon about some morally uplifting topic, and you go home. But there's no direct or mystical experience of the divine realm. And the most pagans, many pagans, I should say, practice some form of magic or divination, and these are ways of coming in more direct contact with the gods themselves. And I think many people are missing that. Many modern people are missing that. That was a feature of older religions, and it's still a feature of the more mystical branches of contemporary religions, but it's something that I think a lot of people have been missing. So if people are not completely materialist and essentially ignore the divine realm entirely, then they may not be satisfied with the dominant religions, and they may be looking for something that gives them a more direct experience of the divine, and that also is perhaps more compatible with modern attitudes about the environment and about gender.
So if we have someone listening tonight who'd like to explore paganism, how would they know which branch of paganism would suit them best?
Well, that's a good question, and sometimes it may take some exploration to do that. Certainly if by reading mythology or even some fantasy literature, they feel drawn to particular gods or goddesses, then I would say that's the place to start. Many people have studied Greek and Roman mythology, and they have an emotional attachment to some of those gods and goddesses, and so the Greek and Roman traditions are very natural for them. Many people nowadays are following Celtic traditions.
Yes.
And that's certainly one of the more popular varieties of Neopaganism. Egyptian religion has always been a popular version of Neopaganism, and so forth. So I would say, if you already feel drawn to a particular mythology or culture, then that's probably a place to start looking. But, you have to kind of try it, and if it just doesn't grab you, if it doesn't feel quite right, then, you read some books, you go to some public rituals that may be from another tradition, and you may find that your interests are different. So, for example, I'm ethnically, I'm Anglo-Saxon and Celtic, but my religion is Greek, so, and as far as I know, I have no Greek ancestry. So it's not necessarily what your ethnic background is. So I would say that, you explore, read books, find out what's going on in your local community, attend some public rituals, and if it looks like there's a group that's doing some interesting things, then get more involved with them. And, there's also quite a few eclectic pagans, and they may feel an attachment for a Greek god and a Celtic god and a Norse god, and that's okay too. These are all really just names and images through which we access these different aspects of divinity. And I kind of like to work within one tradition, but some people are very happy sort of mixing and matching as well. And so I think that that's fine if that works for you.
All right, stand by. You and I have to take our final break for this hour, and we'll be back after some short words from our sponsors. And don't forget, Exonation, this coming 3rd, 4th, and 5th of November, I will be in Fellsmere at the 4th annual Para-Unity Conference. That's going to be held in Fellsmere. I was there last year. This year we're going to be there, and most probably next year, because it's a great experience for one and all. If you're an investigator, whether you're an author, whether you're just somebody curious, visit paraunityconference.com. Dr. John Opsopaus and I will be back after this break. Don't go away.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Exonation Dr. John Opsopaus, I should say, is our guest this hour. His website is opsopaus.com. That's opsopaus.com. John, in your book, there seem to be two different types of systems that you describe in your book. Can you tell us what they are and how they differ?
Yeah, so the first system is called the Alphabet Oracle, and this is a system that we know from a number of actually engraved stone tablets from the Middle East. And what it does is it gives an oracle for each of the 24 letters of the ancient Greek alphabet. And so what somebody would do would be again, they'd pray, they would make an offering, they'd ask a question, and then they would pick one of the letters of the Greek alphabet. And there's various ways you can do this. You can pick a stone out of a bag or a jar that's engraved with each stone engraved with a letter of the alphabet. You can do it by rolling dice or knuckle bones and counting them up in the appropriate way. There's a number of different ways of consulting it. And what that does then is give you an answer to a question. And these tend to be very practical kinds of questions, basically telling you if what you're doing is the right thing or not, or how a project is going to turn out, for example. So these were questions that people would ask as they were on a journey, for example, maybe either business people or scholars or someone else, and they wanted to know, how their enterprise was going to work out. The second oracle is based on another set of oracles that were inscribed on tablets called the sayings of the seven sages, or sometimes they're called the Delphic maxims. And there's 147 of these. And they're sometimes called the Greek commandments because they're mostly essentially moral. They're not thou shalt nots, they're thou shalts more. They're essentially telling you how to live a good life. And so they give different kinds of answers. They answer questions like, what should I be thinking about today? Or how should I handle this problem in a more general sense? And you can also consult that oracle by rolling dice, drawing stones, casting knuckle bones, or all sorts of different techniques using beads, coins, any sorts of techniques. And I describe a number of these in the book and give charts and so forth to help you do this. But basically the idea is both of these are kinds of what's called kleromancy, which is drawing or casting lots in order to pick an oracle. So the idea is that you pray to the god for an answer to your question. And with some meditative sorts of practices, you're essentially opening that channel of communication. And then when you throw the oracle, that's essentially giving the god a chance to basically influence the outcome and give you an answer to that question. Of course, you can do follow-up questions if it's unclear. And we talked before about some signs that maybe the god doesn't want to give you an answer. They may want you to figure it out on your own.
So how does the god know what the answer is going to be?
Well, most of these, that's a good question, and it depends a lot on what you think about time, so and about free will, for example. But the way these are generally interpreted is that these are essentially predictions about what's going to happen if things continue as they are. And so if it's a negative outcome, what you would need to think about is how can I change the way things are to make this outcome come out differently? And you could, of course, do another divination to get some advice on that. So they're really essentially saying if things continue in the current direction, then this is what will likely happen. And so in that sense, I don't consider them in any way contradictory to the notion of free will. It's more like going to a very wise person who's seen it all before, been there, done that, and also has a much bigger perspective than you and saying, what do you think's going to happen here? And they say, well, if you keep doing this, this is what's likely going to happen. You might want to watch out about that. And sometimes they're directly conditional. They'll say, if so-and-so, then such and such. In other words, if you keep doing this, then this is what's going to happen. So I think of it more as advice.
Is it possible that the person who is seeking the answers from the oracle actually has the answer within and they're just looking for some sort of focal point, the oracle being such, in order that they can focus in on their own problem and come up with the result?
Yeah, that's quite possible, and in some sense, it's not even necessarily contradictory with the idea the gods are communicating with you directly, because this is more obvious in divination like scrying, which would be like looking into a crystal ball or looking into a dish of water, that the god may be influencing the image in that dish of water, in that crystal ball, but they're also, you could imagine them influencing the way you're going to interpret it as well. So whether it is helping to call this information out of your own unconscious or out of your deep mind, or whether it's being essentially provided externally by a god, it's ambiguous. And I think it's really a matter of which makes more sense to a person. I mean, the Greeks sometimes said, when you look outside to the gods, you're really looking inside. And so you can interpret this all as really sort of a strictly psychological process.
As long as it works.
As long as it works.
Yeah.
That's right.
So what are you working on right now, John?
Well, I've got one of my projects is I'm translating a couple more of these oracles. There's several other systems that have survived from the ancient world, and they're quite interesting, and I use them. And so I'm thinking about translating those. Perhaps I'll do a follow-on book on that. I'm more generally interested in the process called theurgy, which is the literal translation is God work, as opposed to theology, which is God talk. So again, this is about ritual means typically, of attuning one's psyche to particular gods in order to essentially make yourself more godlike and to put you into better harmony with the divine world. So divination was just one theurgical practice, and one of the things I've been studying for many years and have written some about and is continuing to practice are these theurgical practices. So essentially, this is a form of spiritual magic, you could call it. And so I've some of my work on that is out on the internet on my websites.
How do tarot cards work? Like you do tarot cards. Tarot cards are so popular. There are so many different type of tarot card decks. How does one person know which deck to use, and how do they interpret the difference between the different decks?
Well, this, again, is a very personal kind of thing. Most tarot decks have the same structure. In other words, the particular cards they provide, just like different playing cards, have the same four suits,
right,
and, the same number of court cards and so forth. So most tarot decks have the same structure. What differs is the particular images, and even those images will have many common elements between them. So here again, it's a matter largely of personal appeal and what speaks to you. I collect tarot decks, and I have I don't know, probably 100, which is a small collection compared to many people. But some of them I like just because of the art. Others, though, really speak to me. And so what I would recommend to somebody is get one of the common decks. The Rider-Waite deck has been around for a long time. There's dozens of books on it. Or they could find one that if they're a pagan, for example, they might want to find a deck that has been designed for their particular pantheon. Or it could be a Wiccan deck if that's their religion. And, and see how well it works. And, they may waste some dollars on some decks that maybe look good, but they just don't really speak to them. And, an experienced tarot reader can read with virtually any deck because they do have all the same structure, but they might not have the emotional involvement, and the imagery might not be evocative for different decks. And that's very much of a personal matter. So you've just got to, shop around, look for ones that look interesting, try them out, and go from there. But for learning it from scratch, I would say start with something like the Rider-Waite deck, which is the most popular, dates from the early 20th century. And there's lots of books on it, and it's sort of like the common starting point of many of these other decks.
John, we're coming up to the final minute of the show. Can you let our listeners know how they can find out more about you and how they can find your books?
The best thing they can do is, the books you can find at Amazon or any other major bookseller. They're published by Llewellyn, so you can go to Llewellyn's website as well. They can go to my easiest to access website is opsopaus.com, as you mentioned, opsopaus.com. There I have links to some additional information. I have links to my other website, the Bibliotheca Arcana, where most of my writings are. And so I would suggest go to my website. They can contact me through that. I'm putting up some other information besides links to the book. And that's probably the best place.
John, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Great hour, and I would love to have you back on the show again because, like I was telling you off air, for every question I asked you, an answer would come, and with that answer would come more questions.
Well, great. I'd love to do that. That sounds like fun.
All right. Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank our good friends at Llewellyn in helping us to make this interview possible. I'll be back on the other side of this break at 6.5 minutes past the hour as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the XZBN and iHeartRadio.